All right. So yeah, hi everyone. As mentioned, I'm Dr. Sara Wyckoff. I am one of the 2 vets for Texas Parks and Wildlife. And so today, Screwworm will definitely be probably the bigger part of this conversation and of this presentation. But I'm also going to talk about some other diseases that exist out in the West Texas landscape. A lot of them are probably some that you're already familiar with, and just kind of giving some updates as to what we're seeing and what the department is doing in regards to these diseases. And so going to start off with the main one really that everybody knows about, Mycoplasma pneumoniae, or MOV. And just to recap, this is a bacteria that causes a multibacterial pathogen in bighorn sheep. It comes from domestic sheep. That's where this bacteria kind of originated, but then has spilled over to our native bighorn species. This is something where TPWD and our wonderful bighorn sheep expert, Jose, we've been doing a bunch of going around testing aoudad, testing bighorn sheep. Anytime our hands are on an animal, it's going to get tested. And we've also been going and looking at different mountain ranges as well, and looking at what we call the seroprevalence, which means we look to see the exposure to mycoplasma that animals have on the landscape. But then we also look for active infections, so shedders essentially, where an animal might not look sick. Like an aoudad, for example, doesn't look sick, but then we test the nose and we find live bacteria in there. And that's an example of an active infection, and that's an animal we want removed off the landscape. And so, update for now, Elephant Mountain and the Franklin Mountains continue to be our clean source herds, which is great. And so we are always doing monitoring on them, and we're hoping to get like 50% of the sheep on Elephant Mountain collared if we can get there. We're also expanding surveillance into new areas. So we've already done a bunch out on like Chenades, Quitmans, of course, Elephant Mountain and the expanding like Coconut area as well. But we're going to, Sierra Diablo, maybe even looking at the Apache Mountains. And so we really want to see all of the different landscapes out there and the story that they are telling when it comes to mycoplasma. Because we have to remember all of these populations, they are part of a larger metapopulation, even if they are clustered in these little subpopulations. A big part, too, that we've been starting this year is reviewing a bunch of the historical data when it comes to strain types for MOV. So over the past couple of years, what we've been doing is every time that we get a positive strain from an animal, so a nasal swab, we have the lab strain type that and tell us the genetic code behind it. And what that does is that tells us what type of strain the animals in Texas have and how that's different from strains in other type of areas. And so strains in Nevada, for example, that are in their bighorn sheep don't exist in our sheep out here. And that's important for us to know, because if we want to do movement of animals, we don't want to be mixing those 2 strain types and bringing in new strain types to areas that don't have them. That's how you can get further spread of disease. But also, it's helping us build a map for not only Texas bighorns, but aoudad as well. There's not a lot of research on that species. It's not very well known. I think I found like one paper on aoudad from Italy that did some disease work on it. So we're really kind of doing some groundbreaking things here by collecting this data from aoudad, sending it in for strain typing, and seeing, are they matching the bighorn strains? Is it something completely new that aoudad have adapted to? Or maybe they act more like domestic animals, domestic sheep and goats with the strains that they carry. Just a lot of unknowns that we want to figure out that can help us tackle bighorn sheep and come up with the best management and conservation plans for them. And so, of course, we do this with continuous collaboration with the Wild Sheep Initiative, the Western Fish and Wildlife Agency Association, TBS, Sol Ross, A&M, all of the universities coming out, partnering with. You can see lovely Courtney with Texas Tech. She's so helpful at our captures. Can't do them without her. She's collecting a nasal swab from a bighorn sheep right there that will look to test for MOV. So all that to say, this is something that is the forefront of what we do at the department. A lot of money, time, and effort goes into bighorn sheep. And I know I'm personally really excited to see what the strain data is going to tell us and what our continuous expansion and surveillance into new areas is going to tell us as well. And so moving on from that is this infectious keratoconjunctivitis. So big word there. IKC, though, is what I'm going to call it from here on out. But then I also have /toxicosis in there because this was actually pretty interesting in the fact that it wasn't just one thing that was going on. There was two things going on at the same time for these aoudad. So basically kind of last year, we were getting some reports from landowners out here that they were seeing aoudad that looked like this. I don't know if this is a laser. Yeah. So can you notice that the eyes they're not normal, right? They're white, they're pink, they look painful. Pink eye is kind of what you think of immediately. So we were getting reports of aoudad that look like that, but then we were also getting some reports of them circling. And so if you think about it, if you're blind, you can't see, you don't really know where to go, right? And so sometimes an animal just might go in a circle. And so we started out investigating those, collected some samples, and our first diagnosis was this IKC, which is basically an infectious pink eye, but it is spread by flies. And so a fly will go to a cow, for example, it is something that happens in livestock, goes to a cow that has a bacteria on its eye, it's goopy, it's gross, and then it goes into an aoudad, gets around that eye as well, and then it transfers that bacteria. So now you have this infectious pink eye in the aoudad, and aoudad love to live in their giant groups, right? Those giant herds. So very easily, one fly can just go bam, 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 and hit all of those animals in that herd, or at least a big chunk of them. And that's why we were seeing these clusters of pink eye cases. But then, of course, because why would life ever be easy the first time, right? Then we started getting calls that they were still circling and seeming neurological, kind of wandering around, but they weren't having that blindness look. So their eyes were clear. They weren't showing this pink. Like, okay, well, pink eye, when it gets bad is when they start to be blind. So why would they start circling if their eyes look okay? So we did a couple more investigations, got some necropsies, and we included stomach content in there. Or rumen content, I should say, technically is correct. And if we find out that there is actually a pretty heavy load of nightshades, a Solanium species to be specific, were found in the rumen of these aoudad that didn't have the pink eye, but were circling. And so we were able to kind of put together that we had these two different things going on. Some aoudad just had pink eye. Some aoudad just had eaten a lot of nightshades. Some had both even. So just a nice little fun story of kind of like being an investigator sometimes when it comes to these diseases. Sometimes the answer isn't the final answer, but it was really great cooperation between biologists and landowners, finding out who was seeing these cases, when, and helping us get to those animals quickly so we could get these important diagnostic tissues in order to be able to diagnose this case. And then fortunately, though, we weren't hearing about any cases in like livestock, horses, cattle. There were no cases in our bighorn, so no concern for either of the toxic nightshade consumption, which we wouldn't expect from our native species anyway, but also none of the infectious pink eye made it over to them. We had less than 5 mule deer sightings that looked like they had this, but none were able to be confirmed. And so they could have been pink eye. It could have been some other type of traumatic issue. If it was one eye, for example, that's pink, sometimes they get a thorn to the eye. But overall, just to say, it did not become a concern for our native species, which we were very happy about. And so another one that I'll kind of run by quickly because I know everybody loves hearing about chronic wasting disease, especially early in the morning. This is just an update on some of our projects that we're working on. So we did year 2 of a big CWD project that's happening in the Waco Mountains and in the Panhandle, where we are monitoring with Texas A&M and CKWRI interactions of elk, white-tailed deer, and mule deer in CWD detected areas. So that's going to include, of course, West Texas, which is where we went to the Waco Mountains, and then also up in the Panhandle. And so we have, oh gosh, I can't remember the approximate number of collars out there, but probably over 300, I would say at this point, on animals where we're monitoring their movements, and then we go and we investigate them when we get a mortality call and kind of see what's going on there. And then also, just in general, we continue to investigate sick and dead deer calls throughout West Texas and all of the regions as well, and continuing to collect CWD sample numbers to look at prevalence. And then, of course, as hunting season coming up, continuing with voluntary testing. Those are really helpful for us. Every little bit of information is information that we can gain knowledge from. So just really encouraging, if you can have the ability to send in those CWD samples, they're all going to a lot of data that's helping us put together this bigger picture. And this is just from last year, 2025, our capture, and you can see we're doing some measurements on one of the mule deer bucks. Nice one out there. And so moving away from some of the bigger game animals, I'm going to talk a little bit about RHDV2. So this is rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus. This is something that's been around in Texas since 2020, and it's kind of has a couple on years and then it's off. A couple on and a couple off. That seems to be the trend that I've noticed since I've been with the department. And so this year we had, it was actually a pretty late year. It was interesting. I think I cursed it actually, because normally we have calls about this in January, February, and it was March, and I realized, oh, I haven't heard any rabbit death calls. We must have a clear year. Look at that. And then literally within a week, I got 3. So that's what I get for saying that out loud. But this year, it was cases in endemic areas. So basically meaning areas we already had detections of rabbit hemorrhagic disease before. So nothing new as far as expansion, kind of just, again, normal from what we would see from past history with this disease. But what's really cool that I'm excited to see the results with this is that we have been partnering with CKWRI on Mountain Davis cottontail research. And it's a twofold research project that they're working on. The first part is testing vaccination efficacy for, what we consider endangered and threatened species. So like the Mountain Davis cottontail, considered to be a threatened species. And so we looked at this because in California and Washington, they had very localized populations of pygmy and brush rabbits where they know there's, 200 animals in this area. And they were able to go and capture enough of those animals to vaccinate them and protect those endangered populations to prevent RHDV2 from wiping everything out. Because what RHDV2 is, you see the name hemorrhagic. That's never good, right? We never want to see hemorrhagic next to our name on a diagnosis. That means they are basically bleeding out. And so this disease is going to be fatal a lot of the times, but it's also very infectious. And so vectors, which means flies, bugs, can spread it. Sneezing, secretions, excretions, feces, urine, they can spread it. The body, once it goes on the landscape, blood can spread it. So it's a very, very hot process when it comes to transmission. And so being able to provide some coverage for these threatened and endangered species is really important. But what hasn't happened though is it was kind of, we'll vaccinate and hope it works. But what CKWRI is doing is they're actually looking at the biochemical status and the blood work of the animals to see, is it actually showing effects at a blood work level? And then they're taking those animals and they're going to be challenged in a study to see how much protective coverage the vaccine provides when they are actually infected with RHDV2. And so pretty exciting here because we get that full coverage, and then we've really opened up the doors for not only this species, but feeling better about the pygmy and the brush rabbit species in California and Washington about their programs that they've been doing too. So that's part 1. Part 2 is they're also, part 2/3, they're going to be looking to see just overall what is the species status of Mountain Davis cottontails, because there isn't really a lot of data on the numbers, the true populations now, especially when we think about drought conditions and RHDV2. And so they're assessing to see what the overall population is even at now and seeing where that will put it on the kind of list of threatened, endangered, or not concerned species. And then they'll also be looking to see how RHDV2 affects other species as well. So like regular cottontails, because while this disease is very, very fatal in, let's say, like domestic rabbits, they've noticed some species variation when it comes to wild species. So hares, we don't have hares here, but hares that were tested in Colorado did not get sick at all. Not even a fever, nothing. But yet their domestic counterparts dropped dead in 2 days. So very, very interesting, right? What is the difference between some of the physiology of our wild and domestic animals that is allowing some protective coverage in some species? Anyway, I could go on about that all day, but I won't because now I see I have 5 more minutes. We still have screwworm to talk about. So going through a little bit more, EHD, epizootic, again, here's that word again, hemorrhagic disease in blue tongue. Also a common disease that we see out here in other parts of Texas. Usually starts to hit late summer, so we will be expecting to get calls about that soon. Typically, it's animals, deer that are hanging out by water. Maybe their tongues are swollen, they're lethargic, and they're usually found dead by that water that they're hanging out in. This is spread through midges, biting bugs, no-see-ums, and so again, late summer, especially as some of the water dries up, you can get some of those bugs popping up. But what is nice about out here is mule deer and pronghorn, bighorn sheep and aoudad, just have less severe clinical signs compared to white-tailed deer. This disease can really devastate white-tailed deer. They're just very susceptible to it. But out here, they're a lot hardier. So Sean Gray, I know, will love to hear that his mule deer are hardy species, especially in his pronghorn too. But what we do is we look for antibodies. And so that will tell us, okay, we're seeing EHD in this area or blue tongue in this area, but the animals are surviving. They had antibodies. And what's even better is a lot of these antibodies appear to be long-lasting in these species. And so that's a good sign, especially because there's different strains under these diseases. And so if an animal has antibodies against one strain, it can provide a little bit of cross-protective coverage for another strain, which then if it recovers from that, now it has 2 sets of antibody strains. So basically, again, these species, if this is a disease for them to get, we're glad that they, for now, handle it very well. And then now the big hot topic. So I'll just do kind of a quick little recap on what screwworm is, but I'm sure everybody has had this drilled into their heads. I know I have over the last 2 years. So New World screwworm, it's a fly, looks just like this, and it's Cochleomya omnivorax, and omnivorax literally means man-eater. So it's very ominous in the name of itself, that what it's doing. So a reminder, this is a maggot that feeds on living tissue only from warm-blooded animals. So mammals, birds, people can get infested with this. But the big thing here is living tissue. It needs a blood supply, an active blood supply in order for it to get the nutrients that it needs. And so it's not going to go to carcasses. It's not going to go to rotting fruit, vegetables, things like that. It has to be live. And so it can infest wounds as small as tick bites on an animal, cuts, scrapes, little things like that, ear tag punches, but also mucous membranes as well. And so the most common site of infestation that has been seen in domestic animals is navels. So calf navels when they're born. That's a big mucous membrane, and it's very important for producers and livestock owners to treat that navel right away, so the flies can't get in there and start eating at that mucous membrane tissue. And of course, severe infestation will cause death when left untreated because it just keeps burrowing, and as it burrows, it attracts more screwworms, which come on in, lay more eggs. Thank you. And so this is something we're very concerned about. I have less than a minute, so we're going to whirlwind here. I'm yapping too much. So this is just an example of the life cycle. It can be as fast as 21 days, but the important part here is these larvae. We don't want these larvae turning into pupa. Oh, gosh. And so that's why we really rely on you guys and everybody else out there to tell us when you see any of these maggots in any animals, because we need to stop them, pull them out, and do what we need to with the animal or the carcass and stop them from turning into a pupa, which can then turn into mating flies. And so again, curse myself. I printed this more than 24 hours ago and it's already different. So 45 cases now. There was another one in Pecos County. But otherwise, this is, this all is accurate. There's just one more active case, which is the orange on there. You can find this on the New World Screwworm website through USDA. And then this is just another example of the zones. This is from Texas Animal Health Commission. So yellow, it means infested zones. And so that's where animal movement is restricted. And the blue is the outside surveillance zones. And also on the website, too, for Texas Animal Health Commission, they have just released a new guidance document about animal movement. So if that is something that you all have questions about or need some resources about, it will tell you everything about what to do for movement in these areas. And then last thing for us is, so unfortunately, Elephant Mountain and Big Bend are currently in infested zones. And so screwworms have been detected in that zone area. No detections have been in wildlife, so everybody knock on wood. But we are cooperating with Texas Animal Health Commission, USDA, Fish and Wildlife, TDEM, everybody you can think of federally and statewide to do a task force response to screwworm. So that includes ground surveillance, drones, trail cams, fly traps, submissions, calls from everybody about what they see, and of course, sterile fly dispersals. Are happening, and they're controlled by USDA, and so they are the ones that respond and start dispersing flies. And just remember, early detection is key. Please, 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 if you see maggots and wounds, mucous membranes, or on openings of living animals, bloody discharge, very foul, the wounds just getting worse and worse, or if the animals are showing that they're not well, contact either Texas Animal Health Commission right away if it's livestock, or your local biologist if it is in wildlife. Let us know right away. You can't ever let us know too soon. We'd much rather respond to a negative maggot than miss out on a positive one. And then for anybody out here with livestock, these are your two Texas Animal Health Commission contacts in the area. Dr. Leindecker does the Terrell County, and Dr. Doris does everything else in the Trans-Pecos. So those are the ones to contact for your livestock. And I am sorry for the whirlwind on that last part. I don't know if we even have time for questions, but I can definitely talk screwworm all day if anybody wants. But otherwise, thank you.